So as I've mentioned before, there's a very wide variety of methods for developing shamatha. In the Mahayana tradition in particular, there's, for example, focusing on a Buddha image. In Vajrayana, very elaborate visualizations involving mandala and deities and so forth. And such practices, I would think, generally speaking, only a Buddhist would want to do. I don't know why a Christian would want to focus on a Buddha. But then with just a bit of adaptation, you say, well, where the Buddhist said, I want to focus on Buddha, maybe I'll focus on Jesus or on the cross or some other iconic form. So one would have to adapt it, though, because there's something right in the very nature of the practice that is clearly Buddhist. But in terms of this small selection of practices that I've chosen for this retreat, none of them are Buddhist. I mean, breathing isn't a Buddhist activity. And so we're taking something we're already doing and then taking that as the path. And so from start to finish, now we've pretty much finished the mindfulness breathing instruction, although of course that's coming overwhelmingly from the Buddhist tradition. If you look right into it, really there's no part of it that's Buddhist. There's no reference to Buddhist worldview, really. I mean, the Vivanga is not Buddhist worldview. They say this is something we discovered, so it's either true or false, but it's not a Buddhist truth. It's either simply false, they made a big mistake, or it's simply true, in which case it's just true. Like the 3 laws of Newton are not English laws, nor are they Christian laws. He was a very devout Christian, but they're just the way things are. And so the Vivanga, when it comes to that, is either true or it's false. But it's not a matter of belief. It's we discovered this, either they made an erroneous discovery or they didn't. And if it's true, then everybody should just accommodate to that, deal with it, whoever you are. And so with mindfulness of breathing, then it's natural. Anybody can practice it without having to adapt it to become Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, or secular. It's just what it is. And then likewise, this taking the mind as a path, or settling the mind in its path, we're taking something that's already occurring, we're already aware, we already have thoughts, there's already a space of mind, we already have mindfulness introspection, and we're taking something that everybody already has, and we're transforming that into the path, and the path specifically to settling the mind in its natural state. So again, anybody can practice this, just exactly as we're teaching it here, even though the source is Buddhist. Why would a Christian, a Hindu, a Taoist, or anybody else have to modify? Because there's nothing really Buddhist about the method. So, and then when we come to, on Saturday, we come to awareness of awareness. Once again, it's something already there. So that's something I really love about these practices. They're absolutely core Buddhist practices. None of these are just kind of like my favorites that I picked off the tree. They're really core, very central, and yet there's nothing really Buddhist about them. That said, as we've seen from mindfulness of breathing, there's nothing in that technique, the methods with mindfulness, introspection, there's nothing in it that makes it by its own nature necessarily virtuous, let alone dharma. As we've seen, it could be preparation for doing a bank heist, or it could be neutral, just want to release stress, or it could be something virtuous, or it could be profoundly virtuous, it could be path. Depends so much on motivation, context. Exactly as the case for mindfulness of breathing, so here, simply the fact that you're observing thoughts, images, and so forth, there's nothing virtuous about that, any more than bird watching or stargazing. It's not virtuous, it is what it is. And if you read to the end of Lerab Lingpa's account, you'll see the benefits of doing this practice and doing it deeply is your mind is constantly composed. Well, if you're about to rob a bank and you don't want to get the jitters, you might tell your whole crew, hey, I learned from Alan Wallace how to settle the mind as natural state. I think we could really use that right now. And then they could be very composed when they're robbing the bank, in which case the same thing as before. Your practice itself is non-virtuous because what you plan to do with it. The motivation is everything. It could be neutral because you're just curious or you want to do stress reduction or whatever, or it can be just meaningful, all corresponding to motivation. So that'll be true for awareness of awareness. It just brings back a theme that is most in all the teachings I've heard from various traditions, most explicitly in Tibetan Buddhism, of the enormity, of the importance of your motivation for whatever you do. Getting married, having kids, getting this job, doing this or that. How significant, how meaningful, is it virtuous, non-virtuous, and so forth, overwhelmingly is a matter of motivation. So in real estate, they say there are 3 things that are most important if you're buying or selling a piece of property, right? Location, location, and location. And for Dharma, we say motivation, motivation, motivation. It's just absolutely central. Walking mindfully can be a marvelously profound vipassana practice, really bringing discerning intelligence to it, or it can just be walking slowly. So that said, Now we turn to this practice, a brief preamble, we'll go right to the practice. But we'll see in the allusion to this practice, it's the same practice, from Padmasambhava in the Vajrayana. I just want to highlight one thing I've read before, and that is, so one should relax and let thoughts be as they are, continually observing them with unwavering mindfulness and careful introspection. Let's unpack that a tiny bit. So there's the practice. He just said what to do. If you're a person with coarse, unstable mind and so on, and this again is coming out in nomadic Tibet 150 years ago, but interestingly enough, this text, it's 400 pages long, published by Wisdom, it's pretty easy to find, but it says in the text itself that the teachings in this text were really intended for people in the future. It's nomadic Tibet, for heaven's sakes. How agitated could they be? Oh, I saw 3 acts today. It really upset me. There's just not to be upset about there. I mean, people can start fighting with each other. I guess that's interesting. But I've been up there. Man, there's just not much there. It's tundra, you know. So when they're talking about people with coarse minds and all that kind of business, I'm sure they had some in Tibet. But, you know, we almost have a trademark on that in modernity. And so he's saying the quintessence of the practice is, let thoughts be as they are. So don't fix them, don't modify them, don't improve them. Let them be just as we did with the breath, continually observing them with unwavering mindfulness and careful introspection. You're applying mindfulness to the thoughts, that's what he just said, and careful introspection is monitoring your mindfulness of those thoughts, just like in mindfulness of breathing. And so this raises, I think, a very important question. And that is when it says, and it's a homogeneous teaching, as you're observing the mind, thoughts, and so forth, thoughts, emotions, desires, memories, the whole range of jhana, activities of the mind. As you're doing so, in this practice, the teachings are homogeneous, as I've received from multiple traditions on this practice. And they say, whatever thoughts come up, do not modify them. Not once has any Lama, and in written, or how do you say, pith instructions or written teachings, said, oh, if you have this kind of thought, don't tolerate that, knock that one out, or make it better. Never. Whatever thoughts come up, and they actually mean that, whatever thoughts come up, don't modify them. Don't terminate them, don't perpetuate them, don't identify with them, but don't try to fix them, don't improve them. Well, that raises kind of a moral question. It's not kind of, it is a moral question. And that is, what if a thought comes up, I hate his guts, or I hope she just drops dead. Something like that, really kind of toxic thought. Don't you want to get rid of that one? Isn't that one of the bad thoughts? And we have all kinds of, they're not all negative. Some could be greed, lust, craving motivated. They could be jealousy motivated. There are all kinds of really negative thoughts that arise. So what about those? And isn't it bad to have bad thoughts? So I've never been to confessional, because during the years that I was raised as a Christian, it was Protestant, so there was no confessional. You just confess to Jesus. But I've seen movies in which I've seen somebody in the movie go to the confessional, and then there's the confessor, and it said, Father, I've had impure thoughts. What do you have to confess? I've had impure thoughts. I'm going to confess them now. If having impure thoughts, and that you really should, whether you're a Catholic or a Roman Catholic or a Buddhist, I mean, Buddhists also confess and purify sins. If just having impure thoughts itself is something, a sin, if that were a sin, then I were a Roman Catholic, then I'd probably have to pitch my, lay out my yoga mat right next to the confessional. Because I'd be hanging out there, and then, it's me again. I just had, okay, how many Ave Marias? How many, and then I go, had another, what can I do? They just keep on coming up, So it's just the fear of fact that a thought's coming up. It's kind of like one of the bad ones. If you have to confess every single one of them, that could turn into a kind of at least a half-time job. And so is that it? And I'll speak where I know what I'm talking about, because I've never been trained as a Roman Catholic, but Buddhism I know a bit. Is it the case that if a negative thought, oh, I hate his guts, I wish he would drop dead, is it the case that the mere appearance of that thought in your mind stream, is that a sin? Is that a negative deed? Is that a non-virtue to have it show up? if it is, if that were the case, the mere appearance in your mind, if that's already a non-virtue, which then is accruing negative karma and so forth, can throw you into a lower rebirth, then you really should not do this practice. It's really profoundly bad advice. Because they're saying if a negative thought comes up, just let it be, just observe it, observe it. And so, but this is taught by some of the greatest masters in the whole Indian Tibetan tradition, so I'm sure they thought of this. So I think a bit of finessing is needed. And that is, and I like the analogy, I've spoken of robbing banks, I've never done it, so I just hearsay, but if you simply witness a bank robbery in progress, maybe you're across the street and you see guys running in with guns and masks, they come out running out, they're carrying big bags, so you witness it. We know this, okay, I think that people know law. If you witness a crime, does that make you a criminal? We all know, no, good heavens, no. Otherwise, you have to close your eyes or something. So simply witnessing somebody engaging in a crime, there's just nothing wrong with that at all. And if you want to be a good citizen, you report it. Whereas if you see them going in with the mask and the guns, and they run out carrying bags of money, and suddenly you thought, man, I could use that, and you run over and said, I can drive, you want some help? Then you're a bank robber, right? And if that, even though all you do and you just drive, then you can get your 5 to 10 years for driving a car. And all you did, but I was just driving. Yeah, you're helping them rob a bank, so you are you're doing that. So, in a similar fashion, I will say with great confidence, actually, that if you, insofar as this is not a black or white kind of situation, but insofar as you're simply resting in awareness and you're witnessing a thought come up, I wish you would just drop dead like that. You just see it coming up, like a little black cloud coming up in the space of your mind, and you're aware of it. You're aware of that thought as the thought. You're aware of its essential nature as that is just a thought. But I'm not thinking about him, and I'm not wishing he would die. I've just observed that thought come up. You've just witnessed a crime. You witnessed a negative thought. But witnessing a negative thought is not thinking negatively or thinking evilly, right? You're just witnessing it. That's why in the classic instructions uniformly for more than 1,000 years, say whatever comes up, whatever thought comes up, whatever emotion comes up, whatever desire comes up, if you simply witness it and don't identify with it, it will become evident to you as you develop and cultivate this ability that if you are simply witnessing even the most toxic thoughts, desires, emotions, and you don't identify with them, you rest in that stillness of awareness and you observe them arise like a dark cloud and a white cloud, a malevolent thought, a benevolent thought, and you simply observe them, you will see that even if it's a malevolent thought or some other really toxic thought, jealousy, lust, craving, dishonesty, or what have you, that when it comes out like that, arising just of its own accord, and then as you're observing it, it just vanishes, it dissolves right back into the space of the mind, you will note something quite wonderful. It didn't afflict your mind. It didn't afflict your mind. You saw an afflictive thought, but it didn't afflict your mind, therefore it is not a mental affliction. Because mental afflictions, the poisons, the 3 poisons, the 6 primary mental afflictions, the 20 secondary mental afflictions, they're called mental afflictions because they afflict your mind. They harm your mind. That's why it's not a moralistic statement. It's like strychnine harms your body. Strychnine is not evil, but it harms your body, and mental afflictions harm your mind, and they do tend to, if you identify with them, they do tend to arouse very harmful or afflictive non-virtuous behavior. So let's do just a quick analysis here. You're resting it, we're doing the practice. You've rested your awareness such that the mind can settle in its natural state. As you rest in stillness, observing the movements of the mind, like he said, observe whatever thoughts continually, and the thought just comes up, a nasty thought, or a manipulative, craving, greedy thought comes up. You simply witness it, it releases. The mind was not afflicted, so you didn't suffer from mental affliction. I mean, that's just straight language. You're not afflicted, so it's not a mental affliction. But now let's imagine you're a little bit off your guard. The sentry of introspection was kind of sleeping on duty, and the thought came up, oh, I wish that person would just drop dead. And it slips in the back door, you didn't notice it, and you're actually focusing on that person, and you're thinking, oh, I wish that person would just drop dead. It would be a blessing to the world if that guy would just die. Why don't you just die? And you're thinking it, and you're wishing for it. Oh, I wish you would just die. Your mind is now afflicted. You're suffering from a mental affliction. You weren't before, but now you are. It got in through the back door, you're identified with it, and you're focusing on that person you would like to be dead. But it's just a wish, it's not an intention. You're now suffering from a mental affliction. This is like suffering from a physical disease. But you're not accruing negative karma. Because there was nothing voluntary there. Karma is everything about volition, decision, choice, will. But you were not sitting there and think, oh, I think I like to really think really malevolent thoughts. No, they got in the back door and they captured you. It's like putting a bag over your head, putting chloroform in your nose, and then carrying you away, throwing you in the trunk. So you're afflictive, but you didn't ask to be kidnapped. You didn't ask to be caught in the grip of some really toxic emotion. It happened to you, like getting the swine flu. Swine flu really sucks. I had it once. It lasted 2 months. I didn't like it. But it was not virtuous. It was not non-virtuous. It just was afflictive. Makes you feel bad. And so likewise, these mental afflictions, they afflict, but simply having a mental affliction dominate your mind isn't in and of itself accruing negative karma. But it is afflictive. And that's what you're trying to guard yourself in this practice. You're aware of any type of toxic thoughts or desires and so forth and so on, but you don't let them slip in. You observe them coming up, and you do not get caught in their grip, so then you're not afflicted. But now let's take a third step. And the thought comes in, oh, I wish that guy would just drop dead. So there it is. That's a mental affliction. It's called cruelty, wishing harm on someone. That's a mental affliction. So now you're actually thinking about that person, how deplorable that person is, how the world would be better off if that person were gone, dead and buried. Oh, I wish that would happen. And then, if the thought arises, I think I might be able to do that. I know a couple of my friends, they're assassins for hire. I think maybe I could, and I've got some extra cash, there's that joy of having wealth. I have some extra wealth, maybe I can hire an assassin. When should we do it? I've heard he's visiting Australia, and this is kind of a lawless land anyway, so maybe nobody would notice. And so if you're starting to plan it, in that moment that I want to do that, let's see how I can work that out. In that moment, now even if nothing ever comes of it, you're already accruing negative karma. That will throw you down. I'm now intending to kill that person, and I'm going to work with, and we're trying to work it out. And so you're already accruing, just like a person who's planning a terrorist act and is preparing the bombs and so forth. Even if none of the bombs ever goes off, if the police find a person who has, clear terrorist affiliations, goes into that person's basement and finds a bunch of bombs and so forth, do you think that person might go to jail? Conspiracy. Conspiracy to engage in a terrorist act. That'll give you at least good 5 or 10 years, even without blowing up anybody. Because you not only wanted it, you're actually intending it, and you're in the process of making it happen. So all of this then is the nuance. Witnessing is like witnessing a crime. Identifying with it is like getting sick. Intending it, you're now cooking. If it's something negative, you're really cooking. Then you're really cultivating negative karma. And that would be something in the Buddhist context. You don't have to confess every time a mental affliction comes up. Anyone have to confess when you get a cold or getting any kind of disease. You don't have to confess it because you never choose to do it in the first place. But if you're sitting in the quietude of your chambers and you then start planning, intending to do something that is non-virtuous, even if you never get around to it, or you try and you don't succeed, that one's it would be a good idea to confess. Maybe Yanshen will talk about when you have accrued negative karma and you wouldn't like to experience the consequences, before they ripen, there's something you can do about it. You can purify it. So you never experience it, but you do have to purify it. So that's that. So we turn now to the practice, and I'm going to teach this in 3 phases. Actually 4 phases. But they're not really phases, they're not different methods. We have different methods of mindfulness breathing, any one of which will take you all the way to Shamatha. These are not different methods. The first, this one right now, and then 2 for tomorrow morning. I've already kind of anticipated this. The one right now and the 2 tomorrow morning, they are not different methods. They're highlighting different aspects of the same method. So I'll give you a brief intro right now. What is the object of mindfulness in this practice? While resting in the stillness of your awareness, which is self-cognizant, self-illuminating, you're explicitly aware of being aware and resting in the stillness of that awareness. While doing that, you are attending to the space of the mind. So the object of mindfulness here is the space of the mind and whatever events arise within that. Well, in my experience, the easiest thing to detect or to note when doing this practice are discursive thoughts. Easy, discursive thoughts, mental images. They're arising, so to speak, kind of objectively within the space of the mind. You can kind of see a thought coming up or hear the thought coming up. Especially if you're quiet. From the very beginning of the thought, you don't have the sense of thinking it. You experience that? Just a thought comes up and you didn't think it. You didn't even see where it's coming from. It could be unrelated to anything you were thinking about, and there's a thought comes up. I've had that countless times coming up. And you may witness it from the very moment that it comes, just like an image. It comes up from the very moment. You may be lucid. You may recognize it for what it is from the very moment that it arises. That's easy. That's the easiest. Thoughts and images. Discursive thoughts you mentally hear. Discursive images you mentally see. And so you watch them continually with mindfulness. So when he says, observe the thoughts, you might think, okay, I got it, that's what you do. But then you might be missing out on something. Because the term that we translate as thoughts, here from the Tibetan, is namdo in Tibetan, doesn't just refer to discursive thoughts. It also refers to subjective impulses, like a desire coming up, an emotion coming up. They're referring to all manner of activities of the mind. And so if you're just focusing on these thoughts that you can see coming up in the space of the mind, then you might let pass by unnoticed desires that are coming up. Because desires don't come and say, hi, face on, they come up from behind. And so a desire is a subjective impulse. And so that desire then is also thought. Emotions are grist for the mill. You're observing thoughts, observing desires, observing emotions, observing feelings, observing states of consciousness. Whether you're drowsy, whether you're bored, you're interested, you're happy, you're sad, you're interested, and so forth. These are all grist for the mill. In other words, space of the mind and whatever arises within it. So you don't want to stop. You don't want to limit the practice by focusing on the easiest thoughts and images that are coming up and saying, hi. But also be aware as quickly as you can of these subjective impulses and all virtues of the mind. All virtues. We have a long list. All virtues of the mind are all subjective impulses. They're not something that happens to you. And all mental afflictions are subjective impulses. We have big lists. They're all subjective impulses. And then there are many that are just neutral. I'd like some water, and then I drink some water. Okay, that was the desire for water when you're thirsty. That's an ethically neutral impulse. But it doesn't come this way. It comes from this side, this way. So one wants to make sure that you don't omit or overlook the subjective impulses. And then finally, there's a space of the mind itself, the domain in which these objective appearances and subjective impulses are arising, where they're arising in a domain, space of the mind. So on occasion, as you're doing this practice, and you don't see any thoughts, and you're not seeing anything particular or interesting in the way of a desire or an emotion, quite quiescent, nothing much happened, all quiet on the Eastern Front, you might think, well, I guess there's nothing to do. Just like that monk that couldn't pick up the sensations of his breath. Well, I guess there's nothing happening, so I guess I can just settle back and wait till the show begins. Wrong. You never do that. There's always something to cognize. And so if you don't detect any events taking place within the space of the mind, you observe the space of the mind. So those are not different methods. When you're doing this practice in its entirety, then all of the above, whatever comes up, you observe its nature. Final point, it's a rather important one, it's also interesting, I could just go on and on about this one. I'll keep short because we want to go into practice. And that is, have you ever been tortured by your thoughts, bothered by your thoughts, distressed by your thoughts? Probably. But you don't need to be. Any more than you need to be distressed by watching a really bad movie. So there are bad movies, there are good movies, but some are really, rubbish. But you don't need to be upset if you're with somebody who really wants to watch a rubbish movie. What I would suggest, if you're in that situation sometime, Just settle your mind in its natural state. The other person enjoying your movie and you're just sitting there, still, hi. And just, images coming up, soundtrack coming up. How do you like the movie? It was okay. I was settling my mind in its natural state all the way through. It was really okay. The movie was rubbish, but never mind. And so, that's being lucid with respect to a movie. A person's really getting into the movie. They're crying and they're laughing and then hoping and fearing and don't go there, and all that kind of business. That's because you're basically watching the movie in a delusional fashion. Because nobody's in there. And, so you can enjoy a movie only if you're delusional, I think. If you're lucid and you're just seeing images as images and sound as sound, well, movies are pretty much all the same. A lot of noise, a lot of imagery. I think I've seen enough. But the point here being is not trivial. And that is, why should we ever be tortured by thoughts again? You're not tortured when you're forced to watch a bad movie. You're not tortured to recognize a bad movie is a bad movie. But you're not threatened by it, you're not disturbed by it, you don't have to be. And so insofar as, now this is a skill that can be cultivated. Anybody can cultivate it. There's no sign on the dotted line for a creed or belief system. And that is simply cultivate, nurture, develop, and cultivate this ability to rest in the stillness of awareness no matter what thoughts come up. They're just cloud formations arising in the mind, and they have no power of their own, any more than the images on a television screen or a movie theater screen have power of their own. They have no power at all. They're just images. And likewise, the thoughts, the images come up, they're just a soundtrack. They're just the video track. And so they have power only because you identify with them. Only because you are superimposing, I don't like those thoughts. These thoughts, they can't torture you any more than the images on a television screen can torture you. So if you're being tortured by your mind, that's because you let it. If you rest in awareness, it can't get in. It appears to you. You're not cringing and withdrawing, dissociating. You're being fully present with the thoughts, but you're not identifying with them, and you're not getting caught in the grip. So the simple point that the Buddha himself made to Bahia, in the cognized, let there be just the cognized. What he means by that, of course, is as you're witnessing mental events, simply see them as mental events. And they're empty. They have no power. Any more than the soundtrack or the video track of a movie has power to alter your emotions. It doesn't have that power. If it has power, it's because you gave your power away. And so, let's draw a powerful analogy, and then we will go to the practice. But it's very powerful and very, very close. If, as you're resting in awareness and observing the activities of the mind, if you simply recognize them as activities of the mind and not as mine, we've all been exposed to a fair number of movies and documentaries and television programs and so forth. And who hasn't seen an image of Auschwitz, the atrocities committed there, and other acts of violence and brutality and really evil deeds? Who's not ever had any exposure to that at all? Hopefully not in real life, but that's what documentaries and so forth. So we witnessed many terrible things. And we've heard many terrible statements come up. So simply remembering a terrible statement made by somebody that you heard on the internet or what have you, then having that simply come up, again, that's not a non-virtue. But in the moment that it comes up, including words that were said to you, not just movie. Years ago, I won't tell the story, but one poignantly comes to mind of a father who made just an almost inconceivably harsh statement to his son. He didn't mean to be harsh, but it came kind of naturally to him. And it just shattered his son's self-confidence. That's all I'll tell about the story. But it happened when the son was maybe 12 years old. It's not I, by the way. But when I would hear that person recount how his father had just slammed him, it's like taking a hammer and just crushing his self-confidence. He was just a very disturbed man, the father. But when I saw the son recounting that, I've heard him tell that story a number of times. Every time, tears come to his eyes. It was just so wounding, so devastating to be treated like that by your own father, We expect more. And so, clearly, every time he'd tell that story, probably many times when he recalled it, because it's indelibly burned into his memory, he would suffer. From what I could see, he would suffer every time. He was reliving that very tragic event of being brutalized by somebody who should have been taking care of him. post-traumatic stress disorder, about which I have no professional knowledge at all, so I will not comment. I'll just speak as a Buddhist meditation teacher and a practitioner. If one can replay that video, it's going to come up anyway, you don't have to try. If you replay that video and there's your father and you've just spoken to him and then he crushes you, probably out of his own insecurity and lack of self-worth, so he's going to get some of your worth and take it. If you can simply see that as empty appearances, because that's what it is now. That's what it is now. It's just an empty appearance. There's nobody there. This is a recording. This is a recording, and it has no power. And if you can rest your awareness and recall those words, the facial expression, the scene, and so forth, and just witness it, and not cringe, don't identify with it, then you become lucid with respect to that memory. You're not reliving that experience, which can be very painful and become very habitual. You're not reliving the experience. You're not reliving anything else. You're freshly living for the first time this recording. And it has no power. There's nobody there. There's nobody brutalizing you. There's nobody putting you down. There's nobody there at all. This is a recording of a dead man. So it has no power. And if you can see it in the cognized, let there be just the cognized, that has no power to harm you. And when you see it for what it is, it doesn't have any power. This is a recording of a dead man. How can that be harmful to me? There's nobody there. So, what you've done is you become lucid with respect to your mind. When you relive it, you're attending to your father who spoke so harshly and in such a dismissive way to you. You're reliving it. And you're having the sense of your father putting you down. You have yourself being the victim and crushed by that. You're reliving it. You're not in the here and now, you're in the there and then, and you're doing it all over again. And you're reinforcing your own suffering. But this is all self-inflicted, because the father did it to you only once. But you can do it to yourself 20, 30 times. And why would you do that? So you're not lucid. When you're reliving it, you're not lucid. You're having a non-lucid thought and non-lucid memory, because you've gone back in time, and you're doing it all over again. And metaphorically speaking, as far as your brain knows, your body doesn't know anything, but in terms of brain activity, the brain is functioning now as it did when you were first abused. In terms of biological substrate, you're getting it twice now, but you did it the second time, and the 10th time and the 100th time. You did it to yourself, and the brain, in terms of brain mechanisms, is happening all over again. But you did it the 99 times, your dad did it once, so who's the big culprit here? So, the lucidity point. If you can see a mental event as a mental event and not conflate it with your dad, or that traumatic experience, or that, because they're not that, they're just a mental event which has empty of any kind of juice of its own. When you become lucid with respect to your own mind, noting the emotions coming up and not identifying with them, noting the desires and not identifying, the thoughts and not identifying, seeing them all as mental events arising in the space of the mind, none of them have any power. In which case, insofar as you're lucid with respect to your mind in the daytime, your mind, not your emotions, desires, thoughts, or memories, none of them need torment you ever again, because they don't have the power from their own side. I've used this word lucid very consciously. You can be in the midst of a nightmare, and you can be traumatized, terrorized. And if you have repeated nightmares, you may be afraid to fall asleep. There are people like that, right? I don't want to fall asleep because I have this recurring nightmare, and it just scares the crap out of me. I'm horrified. And when I wake up, I just feel like already shattered. I'm starting the day and already feeling traumatized by my dream. So, how is it that the dream can traumatize anybody? Because you don't recognize it as a dream. You're living an experience that maybe have never occurred. It's purely a nightmare based on just the mind's free creations. Or maybe it's a nightmare rooted in, inspired by past trauma. That could certainly happen. And you're in the midst of the dream, not knowing you're dreaming, and you're traumatized all over again. Why? Because you don't recognize the dream as a dream, and you recognize it for something it is not. Actual people, actual brutality, actual trauma. But you're fundamentally delusional because, number one, you don't know. This is avidya, ignorance. You don't know the nature of your experience. And number two, you're getting it wrong. You think, really, these people are harming me, threatening me, terrifying me, and so forth. But insofar as, or I'll say if you're lucid, insofar as you're lucid in a dream, You know the dream as a dream. You're recognizing a mental event as a mental event while you're dreaming. Because that's what they are, they're mental events. Insofar as you're lucid, and the same nightmare is taking place, it's just like watching a horror movie. If you're lucid, you know that nobody's there. Any more than the little people in your tiny, I was about to say inside your television. That puts me back about 30 years, doesn't it? Because who's inside a flat screen? A lot of very flat people, I guess. But the old-fashioned days, you remember when they're like that? So who's inside there? Who's inside there? Well, insofar as you're lucid, then in this three-dimensional space of your dream, you know there's nobody there. They're just empty appearance of free creations of your own mind, so they have no power to harm you. When you know they're a dream, then you're just simply observing mental events as mental events. And in a story I've told many times, a woman that I know, very, very accomplished in lucid dreaming, in her very lucid dream, a thug approached her with a great big knife, Crocodile Dundee, finally in the right country, Crocodile Dundee knife, and he brought out his knife, and he's about to, assault her with his knife. And she's a tall, slender woman in daily life, and she took his hand, his big, muscular hand in his arm with his big Crocodile Dundee knife, and she plunged it into her guts in the dream. She's very lucid, utterly lucid. That's how she disarmed him, by putting the knife into her guts. She told me about her lucid dream, and I asked her, well, did that hurt? And she said, no, it was a dream knife. And dream guts. So exactly how does a dream knife hurt anybody? And I didn't have any guts. That is, in your dream, you don't have any intestines. In dream, you don't have any internal organs. It's just empty appearances. So it's an appearance of a gut, appearance of a knife, and it's like one rainbow trying to stab another one. I mean, there's just nothing to stab and nothing to stab and nothing to be stabbed, nothing to, etc. You know what I got. And so if insofar you're lucid in the dream, nothing in the dream can harm you, because there's nothing there. It can harm you only because you're delusional. And insofar as your mind in the daytime, insofar as you're lucid with respect to your mind, recognizing mental events in the daytime just as you recognize mental events as mental events when you're dreaming, nothing can harm you. And we'll read about this in Lerab Lingpa. Nothing can harm you. So how valuable is that? Many people commit suicide not because they're physically in distress, because they can't bear to be assaulted by their minds anymore. And they're hoping it's going to be lights out, that it'll be all over, rest in peace. But I think many people commit suicide because the minds are unbearable. So that's the power of the mind. It can drive you to suicide itself, or chronic depression, chronic anxiety, etc., etc. So this one key, the message here is you don't need to fix your mind. There's a rule for that, no doubt. No doubt there's a rule. Have less anger, have more compassion. Good, good, good. Definitely good. But you don't need to be harmed by your mind. You can stop that. It's not by doing more, but by doing less. And the very simple thing is, recognize mental events as mental events and don't identify with them. Then you've disempowered them. Because you gave them power, now you're taking it back. So, the potential benefits are utterly enormous here. And I have no training whatsoever in clinical psychology, psychiatry, so no pretense of having that. But it strikes me as of all the aspects of Buddhism that could interface with tremendous benefit with modern mental health care. This could be really a great interface. Buddhism brings this, but then bring this to people who have years of training diagnosing and treating the whole range of mental disease, which Buddhists don't have. I have none. I have none. I don't know. I never even try to have a person with a psychological disorder, oh, Alan, please act as a therapist. I say, no, I don't have that training. But in meditation, yes. So could therapists in league with, maybe therapists who are meditating a lot, with Buddhist meditation teachers who would really like to share in any way they can, come together, this I think could be immensely rich. But that's for other people to do. I'll help out if I can. But it's for people with years of training and experience in helping people with mental disease. What a tremendous service they're offering. Maybe we can help a little bit. So there we are. So let's have one session starting in just a minute. catches your attention. Sounds like I have a tummy ache. Sorry. The word guru means heavy. Literally means heavy. I don't want to be too heavy. I like to be a little bit lagu. Lagu means light. I'm a light guru. I have to be silly sometimes. So in the last two methods, we both had, in both of those, going through the tour, the senses, and then coming to the mind. That was a roundabout way of circling in to the space of the mind. Then we did first focusing on the body, very good launching pad, and then going to the mind. This session will just go right to it. Subtle body, speech, and mind in a natural state, and then go right to the main practice. So let's see what happens. If you're following the Mahayana path, the path of the Bodhisattvas, now is the time to arouse the aspiration to be of greatest possible benefit to the world by achieving perfect awakening, perfection of compassion, of wisdom, to become a Buddha, one who is perfectly awake. And in order to do so, to step out on that path to awakening, for the sake of all beings, we shall now settle our minds in its natural state. And to facilitate that, we begin by settling body, speech, and mind, as we've done before. And when you come to settle in that still point, your awareness utterly at ease, carefree, loose and relaxed, free of grasping, and resting in the resultant stillness, which by nature is clear and bright. When you come to that stillness of awareness resting right where it is, holding its own ground, like an unflickering candle flame, let the light of your awareness illuminate the space of your mind without moving, but casting your light upon the space of the mind. And in this session, let's do emphasize the easiest aspect or facet of this practice, and that is, do observe the discursive thoughts, the chit-chat, the soundtrack of the mind. And do observe the images that come up. To the best of your ability, rest in the stillness of your awareness, in the immediacy of the present moment. And observe these thoughts and images as soon as they come up. In other words, be lucid from the very inception of the thought or image. That as soon as it comes up, you recognize it for what it is. You're not drawn away to the referent of the thought or image. You are lucid. You're seeing a thought and image as a thought or image, and you know by the power of that whatever that thought or image is, it cannot harm you. It's just an appearance. And you let it be. You observe the thought as a thought. You allow it to rise without impeding it. Once it's come, you do not seek to modify it. And then over the course of time, before long, it will dissolve of its own accord, dissolving right back into the space of the mind. Watch the whole show. Watch the whole thought, the whole sequence of images. Observe the movements of the mind from the perspective of stillness. Do let your eyes be open, your gaze vacant, as Lerab Lingpa advised. And though all of your five senses are open, don't deliberately give any attention to them. This is not open presence or open monitoring. It is selective. You're focusing on one out of 6 domains of experience only. And to the best of your ability, you're giving all your attention to the space of the mind and whatever arises within it. But if you're new to this practice, it may not be quite so clear what to attend to. It may be hard to find that 6th domain. Where is it, after all? Does it have borders? Is it in front of you, behind you? So if you're fairly new to this practice, then there's a footstool into this carriage. It was taught to me the first time I learned this method from one of my lamas. And that is deliberately generate a discursive thought and make it an uninteresting one. For example, Mary had a little lamb whose fleece was white as snow. So we're not going to get carried away with that. But generate this thought, syllable by syllable. Mary had, etc. Generate the thought ponderously, premeditatively, slowly, and with each syllable observe the thought that is arising in the space of your mind. Mary had a little lamb. Until you come to the end, white as snow. Observe that thought in real time, right while it's happening, you're observing it, and it comes to an end, white as snow. The thought dissolves. There's a vacuity, an empty space. Keep your attention focused right where that thought dissolved. Because it's right there that the next thought will occur spontaneously. You're looking in the right place. You have identified the space of the mind. You can choose this nursery rhyme or any thought you like. Generate it premeditatively. Observe it disappear. Keep your attention right where it disappeared, ready to observe the next thought that arises so that you can recognize it as soon as it arises. Try that experiment. If your mind becomes diffuse, awareness vague and spaced out at any time, like counting the breaths, you may generate the same thought or another thought, do the same thing. When you're generating a thought, you may be like a cat watching a mouse that disappears into its hole in the wall. Track the mouse right to the hole where it disappears, and then keep focused right there, such that as soon as a mouse emerges from the hole, you'll see it from the very beginning. Observe thoughts dissolve into the whole, the space of the mind. Stay focused, ready to observe the next one. And whatever comes up, simply observe its nature without modifying it, perpetuating it, or terminating it. Just let it be. Watch it arise, watch it play out, watch it disappear. Watch the whole show. Remember to monitor the flow of mindfulness with introspection. Mindfulness is focused on the space of the mind and its contents. Introspection monitors the flow of mindfulness. And as soon as you see your attention has been carried away, distracted, relax. Release your identification with whatever carried you away without terminating the thought itself. Just your identification with it. And then return. Relax, release, and return. But with your faculty of introspection, also monitor, look out for that clear flow of cognizance fading and just sitting there with a blank mind or kind of dazed. And as soon as you see clarity is diminished, refresh. Restore the flow of clear cognizance and retain that flow. In this way, balance the current, the flow of your mindfulness. But again, if you find your awareness getting nebulous, difficult to identify the object, that space, there's another complementary approach, and that is, instead of generating a discursive thought, you could generate a mental image. It could be a beautiful scene from nature, a piece of fruit, anything you like. In the same way, decide on what you like to bring to mind, what image. Generate that image as clearly as you can. Sustain it for as long as you can, for a while. And then relax and let that image dissolve right back into the space of the mind. And as it does so, keep your attention focused right where it vanished. That is the space of the mind, and that's where the next image will pop up. The same theme, but you may either generate a discursive thought, the soundtrack, or an image or video. Let's continue practicing now in silence. So one of the thoughts that came up as I was doing the practice was a recording of my own words, and it's snagged, like I think I got that wrong. If you're trying to atone for your sins, you don't ask how many Ave Marias, do you? You say Hail Marys, or is that the same? Different, isn't it? I thought so. So you're not going to get any better if you say Ave Maria, Ave Maria. That's not going to help. Hail Mary, full of grace. I just finished all I know. But it's not Ave Maria. Okay, I just had to correct that. Yeah. She's there. You know what I'm going to do? I know I'd get a whooping. Alrighty, let's continue with the practice, and that is whenever you meditate, here on the top of page 10. Whenever you meditate, bear in mind the words no distraction and no grasping, and put this into practice. This is the quintessential pith instruction for the entire method, and it's very precise. And that is when it says, sustain that flow of awareness, that continuum of consciousness that I refer to without distraction. That is, you're resting in the stillness of your awareness, and you don't let it be carried away by some appearance to the mind, a sound, a tactile sensation. You don't let it be carried away by a thought or an image. You hold your own ground. You remain still in the midst of the movements of thoughts, but not carried away by them. And it's exactly that way that you're not afflicted by thoughts, memories, and so forth. That's no distraction. But no grasping. Here, grasping means identifying with. So the point, and I have this from Young Rinpoche, incredibly accomplished yogi, passed away 3 years ago. He said that the distraction is with respect to appearances, being drawn away by appearances, sensory or mental, drawn away. You've left your throne. And the grasping is identifying with subjective impulses. So you're distracted by objective appearances, and you're grasping onto subjective impulses like desires and emotions and feelings and so forth. And so if you can be so loose, so relaxed, that you're not drawn away, seduced, abducted, carried away by appearances, either sensory or mental, and even when desires, emotions, and so forth, these subjective mental afflictions arise, well, virtuous mental states arise, that they're arising, they're flowing from the subjective, even as they do so, you're aware of their arising, but you're not identifying with them. So is that possible? Is it possible to be aware of depression arising, or sadness, or fear? Is it possible, these are subjective impulses, is it possible to be aware of these subjective impulses, fear, depression, anger, without being fearful and depressed and angry? Is that possible? If not, then this practice isn't going to go very far, because that's exactly what he's saying, do that. And so spatially, if you take a spatial metaphor, I find this very useful myself. It's let your awareness rest in awareness that is larger, a larger space than the desire, the emotion, the feeling, the thought that comes up. So here's the space of my awareness, and here comes some depression. Here comes some sadness. Here comes some irritation. Here comes some fear. So I'm experiencing it. I'm not recoiling from it. I'm not collapsing down into it. I'm not getting caught in the grip of the emotion or the desire. I'm fully aware of it, but it doesn't fill me. It doesn't fill the space so that my mind is saturated by the fear, the depression, anxiety, and so on. It's manifesting, and I'm not even impeding it. I'm not trying to contain it. I'm not trying to control it or modify it. I'm creating so much space that whatever that emotion or mental affliction is, whatever's coming up, can fully blossom, but my awareness is bigger than it. And then it dissolves of its own accord. Something like that, really. And it is possible. It's possible to be aware of sadness without being caught in the grip of it. Aware that irritability or anger is arising without being irritable or angry. So I won't elaborate, but it is possible, and it's a skill to be cultivated. It doesn't come naturally. We have not biologically evolved to make this easy. But there's a lot more to us than our biological evolution. So then he continues, as you gradually familiarize yourself with the meditation, increase the duration of the sessions. So, as I mentioned before, as you get more and more familiar, more adept, you're moving along stage 1, 2, 3, 4, then you decrease the number of sessions and you increase the duration. If dullness sets in, arouse your awareness. So that's the short version. If dullness sets in, arouse your awareness. I said refresh, restore, and retain. But that's just an elaboration on freshen up, freshly arouse, pay attention, take an interest. If there's excessive scattering and excitation, loosen up. And I elaborated, relax, release, and return. But he gives the shorter version. Determine in terms, oh, this is so important. Determine in terms of your own experience the optimal degree of mental intensity, as well as the healthiest diet and behavior. And that is, the emphasis on relax, relax, relax doesn't mean just give no effort at all. Then you just kind of splay out like a jellyfish, like that. You need to focus. It takes some effort to selectively focus on the mental domain and select out the other 5 physical. It takes some effort to release the grasping that would move your awareness. It takes some effort to apply introspection and apply the remedy. But if you give too much effort, you'll start just getting tighter, tighter, tighter. You'll get the stability and lose relaxation. If you give too little effort, you'll become more and more relaxed, but you'll lose clarity. So we're back to our balances. Yeah? So you need to find, and again, this optimal degree of mental intensity goes right back to the Buddha. This is a song that's been sung for 2,500 years. I believe somebody just recently told me it was Buddha speaking with his own attendant Ananda, who was apparently a very accomplished player of a lute or some stringed instrument. And Ananda was asking about how much effort to give in meditation. And then the Buddha, I just read this a month ago or so. Maybe I think I got it right. And the Buddha said, well, Ananda, do you know how to play a lute? Yes, yes, Lord. Well, if you string the lute too tight, does that sound good? No, Lord. If it's too slack, does that sound good? No, Lord. Well, just like that, string your mind, tune your mind. Too tight, and you won't play well. Too slack, and you won't play well. Find the optimal degree of tension that is sustainable and keeps you clear and sharp. So that's crucial, and it's an inside job. Nobody can tell you how much. You have to do it internally, and you find the middle way by bouncing off the extremes. So go ahead and try too hard once, and then see what it's like to try too little. Find a middle way. I had, 1988, when Genlam Rinpa came and led the one-year Shamatha retreat. And I was translating for him and helping a number of people in their meditation. But I had a lot of time on my hands, and I thought, I was 38 at the time. I thought, I'm thinking back. I think almost all the problems I've had in meditation, where I've always been just trying too hard. I just think I was trying too hard. I'm going to take a month, and I'm going to see if I can try too little. So I did. I had nothing else to do. So I just flaked out as much as I could. Not reading comic books or not just really doing nothing at all, but really I'm going to see what it's like to give too little effort. And I'd lie down on the most comfortable posture. I'd put my legs up on a chair, like, wow, I'm relaxed. And I would then say, okay, now what's it like to try too little? And I succeeded. Mine got quite dull. But okay, that's what that's like. But I noticed I started writing poetry. That was weird. I'm just not a poet. So poetry, I'm not saying it was good poetry. But you know what they say about it, the dancing bear? It's not that it dances well, it's just that it dances at all. And so my poetry is no good, but at least it was an attempt. So poetry came up, images came up, it was interesting. But I said, okay, now I got it. So I found this extreme 100 times, and I found this one. Okay, it's something in between. So find your own pitch. And it's different from one person to the next. And then find the optimal degree in terms of your healthiest diet. Well, there's nutritionists know a lot about that, and they can also be very specific for your psychophysiological constitution. That could be very helpful. Really, let's make this a 21st century kind of deal. We know a lot about, that is, nutritionists and so forth, can really help you choose the kind of foods that you can best digest, resilience, vitality, and so forth, not hard to digest, and how much also. But then he says behavior as well. Behavior. This is not a strong point of Tibetan Buddhism, of like exercise, yoga, tai chi, qigong. The Chinese are very strong. Indians are very strong with asanas and so forth. Tibetans, not so much. Really not so much at all. Maybe it's because many of them are living at 12,000 feet. It's just cold out there. And it's cold in here too. So I think they're just trying to keep warm. And often their diet wasn't that great because they didn't have much choice. If you're living at 13,000 feet, what kind of yak butter would you like and how much sampa would you like? It's kind of like not a whole lot of choices there. So in any case, but now we really can, and behavior, of course, includes also ethics. Lead an ethical way of life. So there's that. And then he's going to point out some problems, what that might come up. Excessive imprisoning constriction of the mind, trying too hard. Loss of lucidity due to lassitude, and excessive relaxation, not trying enough, resulting in involuntary vocalization. I don't know, making grunting noises or whatever. And eye movements, those are false, okay? Those are extremes, don't do that. And then he comments further. It is a hindrance. You're creating problems for yourself to talk a lot about such things as extrasensory perception and miscellaneous dreams, or to claim, I saw a deity, I saw a ghost, I know this, I've realized that, and so on. So this is before Facebook. They didn't have Facebook in Amdo, 150 years ago. But man, I don't have Facebook. I just don't have time. Or Twitter or Instagram or any of that stuff. I've heard about them, though. But there is a tendency, especially not really much in Tibet, but it happened, I'm sure. People having experience, and any experience you have, if you'd like to share with your mentor, your guru, of course, anything is fine. Nothing's off limits. Wholesome, unwholesome. It's like going to your doctor and telling all your symptoms. You don't hold back because, the doctor wouldn't be pleased. That same candor that you show for your doctor, who has only one motivation, and that's to heal you. And you tell him everything, right? Total candor, otherwise you're not serving yourself well. And likewise with your guru, a spiritual mentor, very healthy relationship with a person who's truly an authentic mentor. You want to be totally candid. If you have spectacular experiences, tell him or her, sure, why not? But what he's talking about here is putting it on a Facebook, telling other people, I had this amazing dream, I saw this, and now I've realized this, and basically this is by and large just an exercise in, look at me. It's ego. It's just ego. Trying to get other people's respect, their appreciation, admiration, and so forth. And it's just compounding your ego. And ego, not helpful. So don't advertise. Keep it to yourself. Keep quiet, and be completely candid with your Lama. But I've listened to some extraordinarily accomplished masters. Yang Rinpoche, oh my goodness. He never claimed to have realized anything, and he wrote this classic text. He gave us oral transmission about 3 years ago, a bit longer. And he said at the end of the text, he said at the beginning of the text, I'm not really competent to write about this stuff, but I've been asked to. He comes to the end of the text, if I've made any mistakes here, please correct me. He was a master. He was renowned. His Holiness wrote eulogy of him, and yet such humility. There's a Sakya master, I never met him, but Shopke Tijen Rinpoche, I never saw him, but I saw a video. It's breathtakingly humble. He was revered again by the Dalai Lama and his whole tradition. Sakya was, he's the real deal. This man has profound realization. I saw a video of him and he said, I have no realization at all, but my faith is very, very strong. Genshama Wonju spent 30 years in retreat or so when I knew him. And I asked him, he's one of my lamas, we became friends. And I said, Genna, can you share anything of your realizations over the last 30 years? And he looked at me and said, I've had no realizations at all. That's normal. That's normal. In the Tibetan tradition, that's normal. I don't say that. If anybody asks me, do I have any realization? I don't say, I don't have any at all. Because they say, you mean like Genshama Wondu? So I don't do that. Nor do I claim anything at all. Because if I claim something, number one, I could be mistaken, just innocently mistaken. I might be telling you the straight truth, or I might be one of those scoundrels that wants to get something from you and mislead you. And how do you know? If I claim anything, how do you know? You don't know anything more than you did after I claimed something. So why bother? So nobody's asked me here, and it's fine, but if you ask me, I say, I don't talk about it, it's not important. What is important is, are the teachings authentic? Is my behavior in accordance with the teaching? And are my teaching any help? Are they helpful? That's all you need to know. Besides that, who cares? So don't sound off. Don't call attention to yourself. It only creates obstacles for yourself. And the presence or absence of any kind of pleasure or displeasure in the body, the mind, such as a sensation of motion. These are the nyam, the meditative, the anomalies that come up somatically, psychologically. they're not uniform. They're just unpredictable. And it can be psychological, heavy stuff coming up. But we'll address that tomorrow. But when doing this practice correctly, bear in mind what you're doing. You're doing something very anomalous. You're giving full attention to whatever's arising in the mind, but with no censorship, no editing, no preference. If you are censoring, editing, or showing a preference, you're not doing this practice. But if you're doing it correctly, you're just totally present with, non-judgmental, because you're not judging whatever's coming up, but discerning. You can be non-judgmental and be discerning. Parents need to do that with their children. Friends need to do that with each other. Be discerning. Employers need to do that with their employees. Don't be judgmental, but be discerning. That's what you're doing here. But you're not editing. Well, when you're not editing, and especially you're doing this for 4, 6, 8, 10, 12 hours a day, and I've done that, then you've opened a Pandora's box. When you're doing this many hours a day, week after week, month after month, which I have done multiple occasions, you open a Pandora's box, I guarantee. That which was subconscious, suppressed, or repressed, it's going to come to the light of day because you're not doing anything else and you are attending to this. So just expect to see your psyche dredged. And emotions you never thought you had, desires you not thought you never had, memories you thought were gone. Welcome to your mind. You're not getting you're doing deep dredging work of your psyche. And all kinds of stuff will come up. Weird stuff, wonderful stuff, painful stuff, terrifying stuff. It's all going to come up. And that's the practice, to be present with all of that. So it's not uniform. It's not uniform. So be prepared for the unexpected. That's what he's saying here. These are nyam. These are the upheavals. They're not uniform, for there are great differences in the dispositions and faculties from one individual to another. People have different psychological dispositions and different psychophysiological, constitution. People have one kind of vata pitta kapha, wind, bile, phlegm. Wind people are more likely to have this type of upheaval. And pitta people, fire people, this type. Kapha people, more earth and water, this type. There's a lot of detailed analysis, quite brilliant and detailed, of generically what type of nyam or upheavals experiences may you anticipate if you're this type or that type. But within that bad category, it's totally unpredictable. How intense, when will they come, how long will they last? This is a shamatha practice, but you can't help but gain a lot of insights into the nature of your mind when you're watching it steadfastly in this way, without censorship. So by settling the mind, tomorrow morning, more things will happen. Fascinating, really fascinating. So I'm very happy to turn you over to Youngshen, and see you tomorrow morning.